united forever in friendship and labor, our mighty republics will ever endure. The great Soviet Union will live through the ages, the dream of a people, their fortress secure. Long live our Soviet motherland, built by the people's mighty hand. Long live her people, united and free, strong in a friendship tried by fire. Long may our crimson flag inspire, shining in glory for all men to see. Through days dark and stormy, while great Lenin led us, our eyes saw the bright sun of freedom above, and Stalin, our leader, with faith in the people, inspired us to build the land that we love. For the future, destroyed the invader, and brought to our homeland the laurels of fame. Her glory will live in the memory of nations, and all generations will honor her name. Long live our Soviet motherland, built by the people's mighty hand. Long live her people, united and free, strong in a friendship tried by fire. Long may our crimson flag inspire, shining in glory for all men to see.
Talk about, like, okay, what happens after World War II, because, you know, he becomes this big celebrity, he's kind of at the top of his game, and, like, you know, America has never been more kind of sympathetic, I guess, in a variety of ways to ideas of socialism, despite, of course, like, there is strong opposition that is about to basically take it all back. But right up to the point where, like, FDR dies, you know, you had Henry Wallace as the vice president, who unfortunately did not stay on, but then he ran for president as a third-party candidate in the Progressive Party in 1948. And Robeson basically, like, stopped, I think, performing and acting to, like, go on the campaign trail with Henry Wallace and, like, support him all over the place, including in the Deep South, where there were a lot of threats of violence and, like, terrorism against him for doing so. Right. And then, of course, like, I guess Henry Wallace, like all third-party candidates, like, flamed out pretty hard. He also became, like, a rabid, like, anti-communist, like, later in his life after this, but kind of a disappointment. But at 48,
if I recall
like, he
correctly, like, during that time, even, like, maybe it was a little bit after that, but in terms of like his career, like I think that like his performances were just like shut down because like the FBI was like watching him, and they were like, no. You
that started to happen around this time. So around 48 was like the first wave of like the Red Scare, and actually J. Edgar Hoover had been keeping tabs on him since I believe 1940 or 41, and actually put him on a list of people who in a national emergency would be rounded up and taken to internment camps. So that's that's pretty cool. And so you know, like, at this time he continued to do a lot of activism. He founded the American Crusade Against Lynching organization in 1946, and what was interesting is that is where some kind of like cleavages. This is right after he had that meeting with President Truman, where Truman felt threatened or whatever. And then he went and founded the American Crusade Against Lynching, which was seen by a lot of people as a threat to the NAACP and their anti-violence movement. But he was supported by W.B. Du Bois, and so they launched that in 46. But then, so around that time, Robeson, he really started believing around this time that trade unionism was crucial to civil rights, and like both needed the other basically to succeed. Then he was called before the Tenney Committee, which I guess was some, you know, sus labor anti-communist thing out of California by Jack Tenney, where he responded to questions about his affiliation with the Communist Party USA by testifying that he was not a member of the CPUSA. Nevertheless, two organizations with which Robeson was intimately involved, the Civil Rights Congress and the CAA, were placed on the Attorney General's list of subversive organizations. Subsequently, he was summoned before the United States Senate Committee on the Judiciary, and when questioned about his affiliation with the Communist Party, he refused to answer, stating, quote, "Some of the most brilliant and distinguished Americans are about to go to jail for the failure to answer that question, and I am going to join them if necessary." And I actually listened. You can find the actual recording of that. I assume it is not James Earl Jones this time, of Paul Robeson testifying to the Senate in 1948. And I wrote down a few notes here because it's not as like spicy as his one in 56, but there still is definitely, of course, like an underlying hostility, and he's kind of like on guard against, you know, because they've already started sending people to jail for refusing to answer, you know, are you or you ever been blah blah blah. And so they asked him at one point to define fascism or communism, and one of them started talking about, you know, it's when you have a totalitarian, and he cuts them off and says you cannot define fascism or communism by the presence of a totalitarian dictatorship. I fundamentally disagree with this framing. So that's kind of an interesting way to look at it, that he thought that like the authoritarianness of a government is not necessarily like tightly correlated to the political ideology that government has, or like the way it's constructed. So like you could have a capitalist country that is authoritarian, you could have a socialist country that's like not that authoritarian, you could have a fascist country. It's really, for him, the important thing is like what social system are they setting up, and like how is like the wealth of the society distributed and who has rights. And he said like that's why the Soviets, even though they had a dictatorship of the proletariat, they enshrined, like they made racism illegal in the Constitution. So would I prefer that or a like free liberal United States where I get harassed and I'm a second class citizen everywhere I go? You know, it's like it's kind of, it's not as, quote, authoritarian for some people it is, but like, you know, for others. So he rejects that out of hand. He describes like the fundamental problem of like underlying capitalism and racism is like power in the hands of the few versus in the hands of the many. They keep pressing him to like, yeah, but what exactly do you want? They're trying to get him to like, they're trying to like pin him down basically and like tell us you learned this in Moscow. At one point, they're trying to get him, and he says like, would Mr. DuPont be a communist? And the senator kind of hilariously says, well, in America today, I'd expect you can find them anywhere. And he's like, no, like, okay. And, you know, he asks like, who controls the wealth of the South? A few people. And when finally pressed to like define communism, he says, communism is interested in seeing that those people who are oppressed, who suffer, that they represent those people. And that's what he gives. And, you know, he says when people, complain that he's maybe not being an American, he says, what is an American today? You try to link every American as being with this country or that country. General MacArthur recently said that, like, we Americans are in a world struggle. So we're a part of the world now. It's not just about, America. He also said, if there are Americans who want to support Franco in Spain, let them go ahead. I supported the other side. And they're like, well, what is the American communist to you? And he says, the American communist is an American, as far as I'm concerned, just as Jefferson was an American. So he does that sometimes, where he'll invoke Thomas Jefferson, Frederick Douglass, people like that. But, it's like he'll kind of, he'll do that little thing where he kind of uses that against them, like, don't you guys love like Thomas Jefferson? He was a rebel in his own way. And and then, of course, he poses an interesting question that gets them a little bit riled up, where he says, suppose they asked if this law they were considering, I think it was the Smith Act, that basically banned people from being communists, like joining the Communist Party. And he was obviously very against this, and they said, well, if the Supreme Court ratifies this law, that it's under consideration right now, are you going to break it, or will you follow it? And he says, well, suppose a Frenchman were asked to follow a law passed by Vichy. Would you expect him to obey it? And they're like, rah, like, what do you, it's like rabble. Like, what do you mean? Like, that's totally, but like, they're not in charge of France. And he's like, yeah, but like, if they say you're living there in the 40s and they pass a law, will you expect the average French citizen to just like follow the Vichy France law because they're occupied by fascists? And it's like, are you saying that, like, you're saying we're Vichy? What? Like, they start to get a little mad. And then, of course, they roll out you said your father was a slave, and now you're independent, and he cuts him off and says, am I? And people kind of laugh in the crowd. And he says, you're now financially successful. Can you think of another country on the face of the earth where you could have had those opportunities? And he says, yes. And then somebody goes, are you going to say Russia? And he's like, yes, I would. And then they get in some crosstalk, and he says, there are infinitely more opportunities for Russia for like a common person. They liberated a whole people. And then somebody yells, they liquidated whole people. And he says, they liquidated far less than Negroes were liquidated. And he ends by saying, why all this excitement about civil rights if they aren't necessary? And it cuts off there, but some really good crosstalk in that, and kind of follows the line of the later one, which is a little more aggressive, but still, like, you're successful. Why don't you, like, isn't America the greatest country in the world? Also, just as a side note,
they liquidated people.
Yeah, they liquidated people. They liquidated far less than Negroes were liquidated. So there you go. I mean, in that real transcript there, he kind of says, like, they liquidated far less, so shut up. Not to say that they didn't do anything wrong, but which we'll get to in a second. Also worth another interesting thing vis-a-vis like the erasure of Robeson is that he was like very active in the 40s with advocating for the integration of Major League Baseball, and which eventually happened with Jackie Robinson. But then Jackie Robinson, so I think in 1949,
came at
the famous speech he gave.
Before we get into this, the World Peace Conference in Paris, right? Yeah, but there's actually something sus about this, which is that he was invited to the World Peace Conference in Paris, that was sponsored by the Soviet Union, I think it was sponsored by the Soviet Union, and so something very sus happened in the reporting of this event. I don't know if you encountered this.
No.
But
go for it.
According to a transcription of the proceedings, Robeson said, we in America do not forget that it was the backs of white workers from Europe and on the backs of millions of blacks that the wealth of America was built, and we are resolved to share it equally. We reject any hysterical raving that urges us to make war on anyone. Our will to fight for peace is strong. We shall support peace and friendship among all nations with Soviet Russia and the People's Republics. So, somehow,
That was the actual quote?
Yep, somehow,
wow,
mysteriously, the AP ended up with this quote. We colonial people have contributed to the building of the United States and are determined to share its wealth. We denounce the policy of the United States government, which is similar to Hitler and Goebbels. It is unthinkable that American Negroes would go to war on behalf of those who have oppressed us for generations against the Soviet Union, which in one generation has lifted our people to full human dignity. So, like, you can tell how one is, like, much more strident, obviously.
Wow.
And, like, people, when they heard that, flipped out. And the suspicion of some is that, you know, a certain, intelligence agency might have slipped in there and
certain newly minted intelligence agency
switch things around. Yeah, that's many of
okay. That's really fascinating because I was almost about to. I didn't come across that part. I did read that they took it out of context, and he said that himself. That but I guess that what he means is like they kind of like really took it out of context and like inserted a bunch of like inflammatory statements into it to make it sound like is like scary and like confrontational.
Yeah,
as
and
possible.
You can actually see like in his like reply like that he's kind of working off what he actually said, where he's like, I said that we would fight for peace and stuff like that, you know. But they're working off of him saying, like, you know, we're going to redistribute your wealth, like, you know, and, like, he even...
They're coming to take over your... Yeah, like, you know,
he even mentioned, you know, the only real workers, if he was in the Capo Fasc house, the white workers from Europe, you know, he even shouted them out in the original statement, you know, but that was, of course, taken out of the changed version.
Yeah. And this ended up being like the turning point when the tide turned really for Robeson in America, because everybody like earned the shit out of like this fake statement that was totally like beefed up and taken out of context. It's also funny because like today I feel like that kind of rhetoric, like the fake rhetoric that probably the CIA implanted to smear him, is like what like Antifa, like your average kind of Antifa edgy like Portland person would be like, yeah, that's based, like that's badass, like, and they would like not like his other statement, when I think like in his original words they were quite eloquent but also careful. And like not, you know, like Robeson was not popping off like just saying like death to America, like all the time. I mean, I guess you know the vibes are a little bit different back then.
Yeah, it's interesting. But like maybe the psyop has like progressed like so far, because I could definitely see from both sides. Like on one hand, like, you know, his actual statement I could definitely see appealing to like some, you know, like because there still is like within the left or whatever in America, there's still that thing of like, you know, you're dividing people like with race or whatever, which his original statement like doesn't do. But yeah, then also of course
quite the opposite. He says the working white people and the slaves like built America, which is very generous, I would say, like to white people. Like, I mean, some would maybe say too generous, but
exactly. Some today would say like too generous. So yeah, I mean, like I feel like there's both like the sides,
or like you're erasing like the settler colonial status of the. I'm sorry, Settlers.
Exactly.
I haven't read Settlers, but I feel like that's become a meme where like. Did you see that map a few weeks ago of like somebody just like somebody who wasn't a native person like publishing like this is what the United States like will look like under communism, and it was like a map of like it was like an arbitrary map of like tribal nations that I don't even think was accurate, but it was like 600 like tiny little it's just like I feel like Robeson would like realize that like there's a lot. I don't want to get lit up for like dissing settlers or anything, but I feel like there's something to be learned from Paul Robeson's, despite his very deep and radical convictions, like not front loading like we're gonna take everybody's land away and like completely abolish everything and like. Like it's just come on, man.
Yeah, well, you know, he was tactical, you know, and like it's different, you know, it changes like over time, you know, like Malcolm X and stuff would say things like, can we have like our own country or whatever, you know, like we want our own, like when he was in the Nation, you know, that's what he would say, and like, you know, obviously like. He had like I mean, he was a person of his time, and like when we're looking back, like obviously, like, you know, you can see things differently. I mean, I think that like, you know, settlers there's definitely critiques to be made of settlers. I think that like the idea of like obviously it is true that white people are settler and that like American society is settler colonial, but
sure,
like
I think there's sometimes with maybe some people
an aspect of I think that
like maybe with people who stand it super hard and like really like hard line on like you have to like kind of like put this front and center and like we have to like we really have to like tear the country like into pieces like and like basically like balkanize it there's a little utopianism hiding in that is like kind of creates like a
Mr. Utopian is here.
Yeah, Mr. Utopia.
To divide us with his isms. But I think like I mean, a lot of the time people who are like that are super young or like really like lifestyleists or something like. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a debate. It speaks to like the fractionalization that like any kind of left wing like in the United States like faces like currently.
Yeah,
where like there's a lot of like edginess of people who like a lot of the time are themselves like very bourgeois and don't want to engage with like class, for instance, because that would like really kind of indict their positionality a lot of the time, and that is a phenomenon. If we can't have like everything, then we can't have anything. Like it's not. There's no point in like having universal health care like until we can like like send every white person back to Europe or whatever, like things like that.
Well, yeah, so, it opens all these thorny questions of like where do you go, like what about all the African American people here, like are they settlers? Do they get like a settler free pass? Like is like it's just it gets like what about like Latinos who came here like 30 years ago, like are they settlers? Like it gets into like these really thorny questions that actually sound more like they would end up in some kind of like because I feel like those people would also be like very like often critical of like the Soviet Union's like nationality policies and like just like moving entire populations of people around to like different parts of the country and stuff. But then it's like but then like the thing that you're saying would necessitate like massive relocations of like everybody kind of, and like how would you adjudicate that in like a fair way for like all of society?
And also like I mean there's a lot of problems with that, and I imagine this is kind of like we're kind of going in on like someone who probably is like 17 or something, or like an undergrad maybe. People are getting people have pretty incoherent political ideas like later in their lives, but like why would like a confederation of tribes like adopt communism, like a foreign white idea?
True.
Like, why wouldn't they use like tribal systems of governance? Like, what does that have to do with communism? Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, I guess a lot of like settler stands are like more anarchist than they are Marxist or communist. Like that's kind of like Sakai is like their Marx. So like it's like and like Bookchin and stuff. It's just like if everything can be like based Rojava. Like we'll just have based Rojavas like everywhere. Like 3,000 of them. And we'll all be balkanized and do mutual aid, and like it'll be utopia. It'll be great. But you know what? Yeah, we could. I could probably fire more shots off. But I feel like Paul Robeson offers a very comes from a very different standpoint in that a huge central part of everything he does is trying to unite different groups under like a common banner to actually affect like real radical change in the world and like kind of play it where he can. With like, what I mean? Like, I think he really like was kind of like, doing this kind of, like old left in like a positive sense, a style of political organization and agitation, and using like, his artistic abilities, his celebrity abilities, and, really emphasizing much like, Fred Hampton, who got taken out real quick when he started building the movie does like show kind of his rainbow coalition of like Puerto Rican gangs and like even like kind of reactionary white people that are poor, and then like the Black Panthers, and like they had to cut that off real quick. Like when Martin Luther King started talking about militarism and imperialism, had to cut that off real quick. When Malcolm X started talking about like uniting everybody and being part of an international struggle and supporting African liberation, same deal.
Absolutely.
Like all these guys and especially African people that are doing this, like Sankara, Lumumba, like the list goes on. It's like this is a third rail that Robeson touched.
Yeah. I think that like the issue is that obviously like the true way forward is like for people to have like solidarity, and obviously like any, I don't like have any presumption to like propose any kind of like political program or like pretend to have like any kind of real wisdom about like how to move forward politically like in the United States. But what I would say is that like obviously like when groups like unite together, like, out of a sense of solidarity, that obviously has like a greater effect. And I think that there is an attempt, like, both to encourage, like, genuine, like, fractionalism, like, to encourage fractionalism, and also to portray, like, just a certain, like, acknowledgement or an awareness of, like, the different positionalities of certain groups as that, like, divisiveness, both to encourage real divisiveness and to be like, oh, like, he mentioned being black or something, or like he mentioned that like, white people have a different positionality. That's division. Like, that's cancel culture. So like, we have to just like destroy the whole thing. Like, I feel like there's both an effort to like create a real thing where it's like, well, no white person can be a proletarian or whatever, like, that's
exactly.
Still like a majority in the country, like, is completely out of this, like, and excluded in the sort of settlers way. And there's also the thing where, like, if someone's like, well, let's talk about, like, the genocide of Native Americans or, like, slavery as, like, important things in the shaping of this country, like, there's also an attempt to sort of portray that as, like, this divisiveness into isms, when really, like, this is the kind of conversation that is like maybe part of solidarity. But again, like, I don't like doing this shit where I'm like, well, this is what I think like politics needs, because like I don't really know. But that's like my take.
Neither do I, for that matter. We're just. But I think that I think Robeson, better than most other people I could think of, like really found this like nice like balance of like, with the whole thing today of like, you're being a class reductionist, like you're being an ID poll, like, SJW libtard. And I think like there's like definitely like if you crank either of those to like the extreme, you run into problems, right? Like if you're just totally a class reductionist
zone, or like you get Strasser zone. On the other hand, you get like, we're gonna like, I don't know what you get, like that guy in the Joker makeup talking about Anne Frank, like whatever, like, Commander Ghazi,
okay, right, just like, and so like Robeson like found like a nice like synthesis like between balancing these two things and like always like using one to like enhance the understanding of the other. Like it's like when he would talk to like pro-labor audiences that were maybe like very white, like he would take that opportunity to connect the class politics that they were coming to hear about with like the civil rights struggle, so that they could understand the connection. And the same thing with like in black audiences, where he would obviously talk about civil rights, which is what they were there to hear about, but then they're also workers. So then, he brings in like he offers a class perspective instead of just like racism is white people with bad feelings, like doing bad stuff, and like to explain the structural aspect of it and how it's like rooted in our economic system and in our, political history and all these other things. And like how you're not just going to eliminate it by like changing a few people's minds or, having a blockbuster movie with like a charismatic leading man that just makes but now I feel like, we've really like those things that's the way that culture really did, after Robeson's death from like the 80s onward, like we kind of doubled down on that type of progress where it's like, look at Michael Jordan, look at Jay-Z, like look at, like that kind of thing, or like look at Beyonce even. I mean, I don't want to offend any, Bayhive people, but Beyonce dancing at the Super Bowl with a Black Panther dancers is revolution now. Which for that matter, I think the Black Panthers also were quite good at they had a kind of Robeson-esque like a Robesonist kind of perspective, I think, as well, where they did that, and that's why I think they were successful in many ways, and why J. Edgar Hoover had to crush them too.
Yeah, there's been many, like, yeah, I mean, for instance, like, the aforementioned, like, crack, quote-unquote, epidemic that I guess some would say, not really an epidemic, not really addictive, but, yeah.
Don't be narcophobic.
Some other Columbia alumni, yeah, might, yeah, you know, there's, like, different things that, yeah, and for sure, like, and also another thing is that, you know, Paul Robeson, like, was you know, not to the same extent as someone like Malcolm X, or really not to the same extent as someone like Malcolm X, but at the same time, like, you could see him, like, in terms of his work and, like, what he did, like, on the ground, for instance, like, at Peekskill, like, you know, as, like, a serious, like, act of, like, you know, solidarity with various, like, different groups of unions and, you know, across the board. Like, he was, like, a leadership figure that, like, doesn't exist, like, at this time at all. You know, like, there's not even anything comparable, like, where, you know, and even if, like, and, you know, yeah, I do see, I think some of what you're getting at in terms of, like, if such a person were to emerge, they would be in. If you can see the delicate balance he has to manage, as he mentioned, where, you know, he has to play to different audiences, like code switch in a way, you know, like, make sure his message is palatable. Whereas, like, today we're in a situation where, like, you could easily see someone trying to do that delicate balancing act just getting completely torn down, like, any, you know, like, that narrow path has gotten, like, narrower and narrower, where, like, you know, as Trump said to Biden during the debate, you know, like, you just lost the left if you do this, like, you know,
well,
like,
like, well, it's like, it's like, absolutely.
Like, if,
I mean, well, you know, for example, he did say in one interview, he made a passing reference to the horrible imposition by the British Empire of the opium trade on the Chinese people, which we now all know as of last week is extremely narcophobic and denies the Chinese people their agency to become addicted to opium.
To just do opium, yeah, exactly.
So, you know, sorry, Paul.
Yeah, he was narcophobic. Yes.
We really need to unpack
he wasn't
this.
perfect. He had some serious problems, like being narcophobic. He was highly narcophobic.
Yeah, speaking of you know, getting denounced, and this is kind of like an interesting turning point. So after he didn't give that speech at the Paris Peace Conference, but they published that thing anyways, and he got attacked roundly in the press, the kind of, I don't know, I guess you could say the powers that be and the House Un-American Activities Committee summoned none other than Jackie Robinson to go down to Congress and testify before HUAC and kind of like rebuff Paul Robeson and basically reassure, I think I had the quote here. It was like kind of a depressing quote where, let's see. Yeah, the NAACP, for example, said that Paul Robeson does not speak for the overwhelming majority of black people in the U.S. And I believe this might have been the head of the NAACP. I don't know if Paul Robeson's son was like paraphrasing him sarcastically or if this was a direct quote, but in the documentary, Robeson Jr. said Wilkins was basically saying, we will fight loyally for this country, no matter how many of us they lynch. I guess then the NAACP conspired with the State Department to publish an article called Paul Robeson, the Lost Shepherd, in which they argued that he was, quote, duped by the communists. There you go again. And yeah, I guess like, I forget exactly what, Jackie Robinson testifies on Negro loyalty. So they basically like brought Jackie Robinson down to HUAC to like publicly give a display about how like grateful he was to have the opportunity to be a baseball star and how much American Negroes loved the United States, and they would definitely like fight to the death in like World War III to defend like the senators from Mississippi or whatever. And yeah, so that was unfortunate. But then, you know, then there was an interesting incident here in, I think it was 49, where then Paul Robeson, you know, he's getting attacked left and right, and so he decides to go back to the Soviet Union for a series of concerts. Now, for the tankies listening, this is going to be a little bit of a rough one. But he went there and he wanted to see his friend Itzik Feffer, who was a Soviet Yiddish poet who he had met when he was on the Jewish anti-fascist committee during the war when they were doing kind of public diplomacy work in the U.S. So he goes there and he asks the Soviet people, I want to see Itzik Feffer. And the problem is that at that point, like, Itzik Feffer had been arrested and charged with counter-revolutionary anti-Soviet activities and was being held in the Lubyanka prison. And I believe he had been there for like over a year, maybe 2 years. And he was part of a group of like the Jewish anti-fascist committee, and all of them were like arrested and accused of treason in 1948. So Feffer had actually been an NKVD informer since 1943. I think some of them, and Solomon Mikhoels as well, might have been awarded the Order of Lenin. These were like prominent poets. And so Robeson, asks like, hey, where's, Feffer? I want to see him. And his guides or whatever tell him at first like, oh, he's vacationing in Crimea, so he's not around right now. And I guess what they did was they like brought him out of Lubyanka, and I guess he was a little bit emaciated and not in great health from being in there a while. So they like fattened him up for like a week or two while Robeson like traveled around the country doing concerts. Then finally, like when he was back in Moscow, they said, oh, hey, like Pfeffer's back and you guys can hang out. So they met, I guess, in a hotel room or something. And during that encounter, this is a part where I'd almost like to like do a double, triple check, because like the summary on this in Wikipedia is written by Khrushchev might have lied. But unfortunately, the Wikipedia article is quoting a book from David Horowitz, the famous pro-Israel, like Zionist, like neocon, journalist or whatever. Yeah. And so this is like a extremely loaded, but also it was relayed in the documentary by his son and other people that were like, contemporaries of Robeson. So I'm assuming this is more or less true, but please ignore the horrible like anti-Soviet bias. But basically, like when they were in the room, I guess Feffer kind of let it be known subtly to Robeson that the room was bugged and they were being listened to. And I guess Robeson asked him how he was, and he did something like he drew his finger nervously across his throat and motioned with his eyes and lips to his American comrade that like he was being held prisoner. Horowitz vaguely quote, he says like he wasn't speaking, but somehow he also said, they're going to kill us. When you return to America, you must speak out and save us. I think that's generally like the kind of message he gave to Robeson. So, running up against like a tough thing here, he's a full-throated supporter of the Soviet Union. He's really put his whole reputation on the line, is already getting persecuted for it. He comes over here, meets his good friend, fellow artist, and realizes that he's actually been in jail for anti-state activities. So his reaction to that was he was about to give a concert at Tchaikovsky Hall, and so it was broadcast on television and the radio across the entire country. And Robeson publicly paid tribute to Feffer and the late Mikhoels, who is alleged was killed by the KGB and then run over with a car to make it look like a hit-and-run accident in 1948. Again, got to double check that. But then he offered praise to Feffer and Mikhoels, and then sang the Vilna Partisan song in Yiddish, Zog Nit Kin Mal, in both Russian and Yiddish. And that was basically a Jewish ghetto partisan resistance song from World War II, very famous. And basically saying that as, a kind of subliminal critique of the Soviet government arresting his friend. And I guess unfortunately Itzik Feffer did end up dying on the night of the so-called Night of the Murdered Poets in 1952, August 12th. 13 Soviet Jews were shot in Lubyanka prison. They eventually, Gorby rehabilitated these guys in 1988 and basically said that they were wrongly accused. And it sounds like they got, I don't know, I'd have to look more in the story. It sounds like there was some abuse of revolutionary justice going on, as Khrushchev would say, and this was like not great. And but I think, but what's interesting about it is like Robeson does this. Okay, so he, knowing that everyone in the Soviet Union is like he's such a huge star there, and they love him, and they know that, like, you know, his words are going to be taken seriously, and so he vocally, you know, endorses and praises this friend of his who's in Lubyanka, and then he sings a song that evokes the Holocaust of Jewish people in World War II. Now, I don't think he was saying that literally, like, the Soviet Union is like doing a Holocaust. I think that's a little bit like overblown to make those like pat comparisons to like what the Nazis did and Stalin's like late paranoia about like Zionists like trying to poison him and stuff. Not saying it was good what he did, but like I think those are different orders of like magnitude. But when Robeson comes back to America, I think some people ask him about repressions or arrests of artists or things like that, and he tells them, I don't know anything about that.
Yeah. So
he basically, when he comes back to America, to the Western press, he completely denies that there's anything like that going on. He does not come back and speak out and say, they've got my friend locked up in the jail, we have to release him. Which is, you know, I mean, a lot of people, of course, in the documentary, they kind of like, they're trying to preempt like all the liberals like walking out of the movie and being like, but wait, like, no, we trust us. Like, he's a good person. You have to understand his thinking. And I guess, you know, his thinking was, somebody said that he came back and denied there were any kind of political purges going on like in the early 50s. And they said he was not about to come to the US and criticize the Soviet Union, which in his opinion was a barrier to world domination by the right wing of this American imperialist system. And so, you know, I mean,
there are like, I think that there are like a couple of different like takes on like the Itzik Feffer meeting. Like, it's actually very possible that, for one, like, just David Horowitz's radical son, just to give the blurb from this book, this is all about his journey from being a 60s radical to being, you know, a conservative. And, you know, it's literally called,
he was a trot. Yeah, he was a trot, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's one of the trot to conservative pipeline.
Yeah, exactly.
And I believe he founded Ramparts. That's
holy shit. Wait, Horowitz founded Ramparts?
Yes, he did.
Oh, God.
Or he was an editor of Ramparts. He was an editor of Ramparts.
Oh, it's such an op. It was so infiltrated. It was CIA funded, I believe, secretly. Yeah, that came out later in the 70s.
Yeah, it's associated with the New Left political movement. Yeah, he was one of the big New Lefters. But then, you know, so he tells the story through, like, you know, different anecdotes of other radicals or whatever. You know, he talks about, these are just some of the people, like, we are introduced to an aged Bertrand Russell, who, the world-famous philosopher and godson of John Stuart Mill, who in his 90s became America's scourge, organizing a war crimes tribunal over the war in Vietnam. There is Tom Hayden, the radical everyman who promoted guerrilla warfare in America's cities in the 60s, married film legend Jane Fonda, and became a Democratic state senator when his revolutions failed. We meet Huey Newton, a street hustler and murderer who founded a black militia that became the 60s most resonant symbol of black power and black militants. Horowitz's encounter with Newton and his Black Panthers, the most celebrated radical group of the 60s, becomes the focal point of the story when a brutal murder committed by the Panthers changes his life forever, prompting profound second thoughts that eventually led him to become an intellectual leader of conservatism and its most prominent activist in Hollywood. So yeah,
that's really disgusting in light of, like, I wonder what murder he's referring to, because one of the quite good things about not to keep bringing it back, but like the Judas and the Black Messiah movie that I thought was like good was, at first they almost like lure you into, like, you know, at one point they meet this character who comes in from out of town who's like talking about like executing a fucking informant, and like, yeah, we tortured him, and like, he's a piece of shit, man. Yeah, we got that pig, like, we fried him. And for a minute, like, they're like, oh my God, like, there's a dark side to the Panthers, like, they're murdering people. And then later in the movie you find out that that's an FBI informant, the guy who was doing it, and he like framed an innocent guy and like basically took the lead and tortured this guy to death and claimed he was like a police snitch. And then the FBI used that. They explained this in the scene, like that basically now this guy is running around to safe houses all around the country, which now gives the FBI an excuse to raid any safe house this guy is in because he's like an interstate fugitive. And they're like, it's perfect. And like he's like an FBI employee basically who's like doing it. So like I wonder if like the murder that David Horowitz got radicalized by was either that murder in New Haven or was like a similar kind of like undercover cop setup that was like, oh, these Black Panthers just, you know, like they're just too much. But in fact, like there's so much fuckery going on.
So, David Horowitz also claims that, like, Paul Robeson would later tell the story of that, like, you know, when he was racked with remorse, and that it was actually that, like, drove him crazy, but, you know, like, there actually, I don't think that any eyewitnesses actually ever went on record, according to other sources, and, like, there are different, like, accounts, like, Paul Robeson's son, and, I think that maybe the daughter of, Feffer, did sort of suggest that like he was passed like a note or you know, talking about how another Jewish friend of Paul Robeson, Solomon Mikhoels, who I think you mentioned, you know, that they had been killed, and that they had to communicate through hand gestures and everything. But others, like Slavic anthropologist Esther Markish, wrote that, like, you know, Feffer couldn't say anything because they're, you know, he was careful to say nothing to Robeson, because, you know, the secret police had told him to do that, and, you know, there's another
so his his choice to like sing that song and all that stuff was more just like coincidentally like a way to honor like his friend.
I think again he wasn't like dumb, because he did get there and he was like, where are all my Jewish friends, like, you know, can I see them? And then it's like, just wait a little bit, you know. So like, and ironically, I guess it was their activities going around the world and like proselytizing to like Jewish communities during the war that kind of turned to suspicion on them after the war, when it was like, who are all these like bourgeois, you know, rich Jewish people you're raising money from? Are you a bunch of Zionists? Like, you know, this is also exactly around the time when like Israel was created, which Stalin and the USSR supported the creation of Israel. You know, I think they thought that it would have a socialist character if they supported it. And well, that was a fucking miscalculation.
I mean, and they realized that quickly and like flipped and were like, wait a minute, so like Israel, no, like, this is sus. This is not good. Like, this is like a right-wing ethno state. Like, we can't support this. But then I think those guys, because they were, you know, I mean, they had so many contacts with the same people that were like, went and ended up helping, you know, build Israel, that they got like caught in this like fucked up crossfire and then accused themselves of being agents. And definitely, I don't know, like, I don't think that, I would say, you know, I don't know if Khrushchev mentioned them in his speech, but I would venture to guess that like maybe he didn't lie about these guys getting persecuted. There seemed to have been some overreach in terms of that, and it's unfortunate.
Or like, you know, it might have been that they didn't tell him to protect him, you know, and that he just gave like, you know, he just erred on the side of like believing that, you know. But I don't know. Like, again, there's complicated things that go on. But like, either this Martin Duberman, you know, the same biographer, who, you know, said that he was obviously like having insane like mental lapses because he noticed the pentatonic underpinnings of a lot of folk music. You know, he did like talk about how you know, his performance in the Soviet Union of Zagnit Kein Mol, the you know, the resistance song in Russian and Yiddish, you know, was like a big surprise. You know, it wasn't like necessarily what they had planned, and that like you know, it was disruptive. Like and the Jewish Partisan Educational Foundation also said that you know, it was like you know, a shock to the audience, and that like you know, the remarks that Robeson made like about the cultural ties between the U.S. and Russian Jewish communities, and you know, his mention of some of the intellectuals, who had perhaps disappeared. That his remarks, and also the change of the song into Yiddish, the audience was shocked. And so, according to them, the thunderous applause that followed were cut from the recording by Stalin's censors, but the chaos is evident in the mixture of applause and jeers that follows the actual performance. So you can see how there was it was controversial in the time. You can still hear, even though when he switched, in the mid, the
which
came out,
was a common technique of his, which he did to great effect. I'll probably put a number of his songs in the episode. One of my favorites, World War II vintage, Polyushka Polye, where he kind of dramatically switches into fluent Russian from English halfway through the song. And that was another thing about him that was kind of amazing, is that he sang in probably up to 20 different languages, and he would do these pro worker songs, or spirituals or folk songs from different countries, and he would sing the first half of it in his language, and then would effortlessly switch and start singing it in the foreigner's language. And that was praxis. He was trying to stitch together.
He was a master of the artistic psyop maneuver. He definitely understood the psyop power of art and music very well, and used it repeatedly to really good effect.
And I also, for those efforts, he was, and others, he in 1952, I guess that would be after the Feffer incident, he was awarded the International Stalin Prize, and he accepted the award in New York. And then in April 1953, shortly after Stalin's death, Robeson penned "To You, My Beloved Comrade," praising Stalin as dedicated to peace and a guide to the world. Quote, "Through his deep humanity, by his wise understanding, he leaves us a rich and monumental heritage." And then the United States revoked his passport for 5 years.
Okay.
And did not allow him to travel. I guess he was the only private citizen.
That's what would happen if you. Well, he was the only one to get the National Stalin Prize in 1952.
International Stalin Prize. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I guess it would make sense if there was a national one for the United
But then, he always was probably maybe more than any other American, notable American figure, did not back down on liking Stalin. And I guess I don't think he ever met Stalin, but he said he saw him once, at a parade or something, or, some kind of, maybe at one of his concerts. But also, what's interesting about him, he's also very rare in the sense of when Nikita Khrushchev denounced, or some would say lied, about Stalinism at the 1956 Party Congress, which I was actually rereading this week. Future guest Jimmy Fallon Gong was reading it, and was kind of surprised by some of the language. I mean, we might have to do it a deep Furvy Khrushchev, and really settle it once and for all.
I've never actually read the book. I just know it through you're talking about it.
Yeah, I've read it, and I've read half of the Secret Speech, but anyways, basically after Khrushchev lied, and Stalin was canceled in the Soviet Union, Robeson just kind of
the ultimate cancel culture.
He was the ultimate cancellation. There were riots when they tried to take his statue down. But basically Robeson stopped kind of just talking about Stalin for the most part. After that, I mean, I guess around that time, I guess in 1956 at the HUAC hearing, when they were asking him, I hope this is really part of it, but in the James Earl Jones version, they said when you went to the Soviet Union, Mr. Robeson, did you give a speech praising Stalin? And he goes, I can't remember. And just a series of questions like that, where they're like, did you do this? Did you just say Stalin was a great man? I don't remember. And it's blah, blah, blah. Everything is I can't remember. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. And it was just trolling them. So even in 1956, he's pretty much and then he gives that thing about how the gulags were filled with fascists anyways. So, what does he care?
Yes.
But he was friends.
I mean, point is that it was he does say the issue of Stalin that's for the Russian people to work out. I can talk about it when I go to Russia. If I sing for them, he does say that. But, you know, when they press the issue of, like, if you care so much about slavery, what about, like, the gulags? He's like, well, there's nothing but fascists in there, and it had to happen, which, you know, is not rendered in the sort of reenactment that you can hear.
And so, kind of interestingly, like, he rides with Khrushchev. Like, he basically he takes a tack that I actually think maybe it was like the better tack that maybe I feel like the Soviet Union could have been better served by, where it's like, okay, some bad things happened under Stalin's tenure, but are we going to sully the entire experience of like the Soviet, you know, Union's like progression over the last like 30 years and all of its like great achievements and like the destruction of the Nazis and like all these other things? Are we gonna kind of like sully it and give all this ammo to like every anti-communist asshole around the world who now gets to go like, Stalin killed 85 bajillion people every 5 seconds, like, you know? Basically it's like, okay, like take him, you know, basically like, okay, like dismantle the cult of personality, kind of like take that away, and then let's like actually like put in place things that make sure we're like, we never do that again, because that got way out of hand, and like we need to reintroduce, I think socialist legality is what Khrushchev calls it, and really draws up a bunch of quotes of Lenin, basically like explaining like, you know, like you can't just have like troikas and like declare somebody like counter-revolutionary and like shoot them. Like obviously like that type of thing is for like the absolute most extreme like wartime emergency measures, you know, like during the Russian Civil War. But like before the war was even won, after their, you know, major decisive victory, Lenin like canceled the death penalty again, and like that type of thing. It's like we should, you know, and like Lenin stressed collegiality amongst like party members at all times, and like, you know, Stalin was so rude. It's like all those things. I think there's valid things in there. However, like, you know, I think Robeson was aware of the international implications, maybe in like a very acute way, of like, if I come out and ride this train and start just talking about like how evil Stalin was, it's gonna get weaponized by the propagandists.
True,
and then they're just going to say everything about the Soviet Union sucks. They're just as bad as Hitler. Basically like the world we have today, where it's like it got muddled over decades to be like, you know, like these are basically, you know, Stalin killed more people than Hitler. No, he didn't. But not saying that you shouldn't like reckon with the fact that like a lot of innocent and very good communists included got like killed under bullshit circumstances for like not doing anything. That's like a pretty big bad thing to do. And so, you know, but it's like Robeson though. Robeson decides like, I'm gonna ride with Khrushchev and be cool with this, and like I guess somebody in the documentary described it that like he just like keeps on keeping on after Khrushchev's speech, and just kind of goes with it.
Even going by the standards of like, you know, the arch enemies of like all communists, you know, anarchists and their leader Noam Chomsky, you know, he said that like, you know, Trump is worse than Hitler, and since, you know, well, I don't know, Stalin is also worse than Hitler, but he, probably at least, you know, he's as bad as Trump. So if the United States can go on under Biden to try to stop climate change, then the Soviet Union probably could go on too, you know, right?
Very good point. Very good point. Yeah. Why do we have to cancel the entire Soviet project because like things got a little crazy for a while? It's like, okay, you know, and you know, if Beria really was a pedo, then good thing they killed him. Like, if not, that maybe was sus. But like, you know, it sounds like I don't know, not a pedo, but like a serial rapist. That was the charge against him. But you know, I think
I don't know. I've been reading a little bit about Beria lately, and I do want, you know, obviously we're very anti-pedo podcast, but I wonder a little bit about some of the Beria accusations.
Well, you know, I had that like infamous tweet from like 2 years ago, or like back when like Epstein died, where I said like, can anybody name me like one Marxist-Leninist government in the 20th century that was like completely controlled by a cabal of pedos? And everyone, like a bunch of anarchists flooded in and were like, bro, Beria. And then then they wrote like some people said Stalin was a pedo because of that book by Simon Sebag Montefiore, who's like literally in Epstein's book, so like shut the fuck up. And is like the 20th generation like lord family from Britain, so like fuck you. But like the Beria thing was like, okay, if you have something besides from like that douchebag's book that can like that and isn't just the Wikipedia article that just like claims a bunch of these things, like I'm willing to hear evidence against like Beria's like sadistic serial rapist tendencies, and I feel like that would be a really valuable data point to have. And like if that's true, then like yeah, like fuck Beria. Like Beria obviously like had like a monstrous side to him, if that's true. But I mean, I don't know, like have you seen what's your kind of like your source of like I don't know about the Beria thing?
I couldn't quite like pin it down. Like I don't like quite remember because I didn't take like careful like note of it or like actually note it in any like note it down anyway. But I did see something that cast a little bit of doubts, like, I think that really, there was a cloud of suspicion over it because, like, part of the reason why, he was, like, convicted was, like, because of, like, treason against, in the same way that you could say, like, oh, there were trumped up charges against a lot of people who were, like, accused of treason against Stalin, you could, like, maybe cast a little bit of doubt over... he was accused of a lot of stuff, well,
that's the irony, right? Is that like he became the final victim of the sort of Stalinist purges, but it was by the people that were like, replacing like Stalinism. Like it was the revisionists, if you will, or the reformers. And so you have to wonder, like, did they do that to like pin it all on him and make him the scapegoat? So it's like it was all Stalin and Beria. I think if there's any area where maybe like I suspect Khrushchev lied, is that he kind of offloads like all of the responsibility onto like those two. And are just like, oh, they took over everything and they're such assholes and like everyone had to kowtow to them. But there's like, I feel like there was like, they had support, it wasn't just like everybody was like fucking terrified and had no like say in anything. And there's no pressure like from within the party to like there was a lot of enthusiasm, for example, for the purges, including from a young Ukrainian first secretary named Nikita Khrushchev, who was like, yeah, like fuck these guys. Like they're all wreckers. Like we got to read them out. We got to root them out. So like he was kind of like, but would he say, oh, I was just like performing that, like I knew I had to do that or get executed? Maybe. I mean, etc. Anyways, like that's a whole can of worms. When we get to like Furby Khrushchev,
although
we can
I guess
dive
like
into that.
maybe these like sort of like probably back at the time, like it was a more serious charge to be accused of like treason and terrorism and like counter-revolutionary activity than to be like Me Too'd. So maybe it was just incidental and it wasn't like, throwing it on top of things like all the, stuff that he committed during his NKVD activities.
Yeah.
So,
It's truly a wilderness of mirrors, but okay, I think we should
I'm not going all in on but
Whirlwinds of danger are raging around us. Overwhelming forces of darkness prevail. Still in the fight, see advancing before us. Bright flag of liberty that yet shall prevail. Then forward you workers, freedom awaits you. For all the world and the land and the sea. On with the fight for the cause of humanity. March, march, you toilers, and the world will be free. Then forward you workers, freedom awaits you. March, march, you toilers, and the world will be free. Oh, Vorstander, solilus kości, to hasło święte, pieśń zmartwychwstania, to triumf pracy, sprawiedliwości, to zorża wszystkich ludów bratania. Naprzód Warszawa, na walkę krwawą, święto a prawo.
we'll start to wrap up, but there's a really important climactic episode in Paul Robeson's life that I feel like is something we really need to dive into. It's got a lot of really interesting facets. This is where the worlds of MK Ultra and Paul Robeson perhaps collide. So just as at the stage, going into the late 50s, like we said, through the, denunciation of Stalin and the rise of Khrushchev, he remains a supporter of the Soviet Union and of, socialist China and various other, third world liberation movements. And I guess because the Supreme Court actually did rule that it was illegal for the State Department to withhold somebody's passport for their political views, he got his passport back, I think, in 1957, and then he set out around the world again, traveling around, giving performances. I think he went back to England in 58 and did another run of Othello again, and a lot of like the final interview footage that people have of him is from like that period and also 1960. So fast forward to 1960, he is planning like a whirlwind trip around the world and then is going to go back to the United States. And I guess, Kennedy has just been elected, and what he wants to do, but his last stop going back to the United States is going to be Cuba. He wants to meet Fidel Castro. So I'm just going to read from this pretty good article by Tom Rhodes in the Sunday Times of London, 1999, called Lost Opportunity, to describe kind of what happens next. Because before going to Cuba, he makes one final stop in Moscow to visit his Soviet pals. Rhodes writes, well, the subheader of this article will tell you a lot. Robeson planned to see Castro just before the Bay of Pigs invasion. U.S., quote, poisoned Robeson with mind-bending drug. The round of meetings, interviews, and speeches had been strenuous, but by the time he reached his Moscow hotel on a spring evening in 1961, Paul Robeson, the singer, actor, and black American radical, was in unusually good spirits. He was planning to meet Fidel Castro in Cuba before returning to America to join the growing wave of civil rights activism led by Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. It was an exciting prospect. However, Robeson never made it to Cuba. After a surprise party in his hotel suite, he was hit by a sense of extreme paranoia and tried to kill himself by slashing his wrists. 3 weeks later, Cuban exiles, led by the Central Intelligence Agency, landed in the island's Bay of Pigs in an unsuccessful attempt to overthrow Castro. This led to an international crisis that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. On the surface, the two events appear unconnected, but now Robeson's son is blaming the CIA for the sudden deterioration in his father's health, from which the singer never really fully recovered before his death in 1977. Paul Robeson Jr. claims his father may have been poisoned by the agency to prevent what had been a high-profile visit to Havana at the time of the American-backed invasion. He believes this was part of a wider plot to ensure that the charismatic activist never assumed his place in the vanguard of the civil rights movement. According to Robeson Jr., his father's symptoms at the time of the attempted suicide were identical to those produced by BZ, a mind-altering drug developed by intelligence agencies in Britain and America for use in a highly classified psychological warfare program known as MK Ultra. He says that at least 2 doctors who subsequently treated his father in London and New York had links to the program. In an initiative that coincides with the centenary of Robeson's birth, the singer's son is making a formal approach to British, American, and Russian intelligence organizations, demanding the release of classified documents relating to his father's visit to Moscow and medical treatment. Most people remember Robeson for his rich bass voice and songs such as Old Man River and Summertime that form the core of his repertoire. In Britain, he was also famous for his portrayal of Othello, opposite the young Peggy Ashcroft's Desdemona, and the couple's controversial love affair. Yeah, I think he almost married her in the 20s. Anyways,
well, he had he had an actual affair with her. Like,
oh, he did,
yeah,
married,
and then and she was white, so it's like,
he eventually, they didn't go through with it. But anyways, Robeson, however, was more than an actor and singer. He learned more than 20 languages, including several African dialects, Chinese, and Russian. He was also the first black man to be employed by a leading New York law firm. For intelligence agencies in America and Britain, Robeson's stature as an artist, combined with his increasingly radical politics, made him a serious threat. He was a close friend not only to American activists, but also to leading lights of the colonial independence movement, such as Joanna Jawaharlal Nehru and Jomo Kenyatta. As early as 1935, MI5 officers visited Robeson on the set of Sanders of the River, an Alexander Korda epic that was the first to feature a powerful black male star. The CIA, editor's note, I think they mean the OSS, opened a file on Robeson in 1943. At the end of the war, his case was assigned to the agent directly responsible for covert operations. According to his son, Robeson had several close brushes with death in the next decade. In 1947, a car in which he was a passenger suddenly lost its left wheel and is found to have been sabotaged. He was the target of Senator Joseph McCarthy's 1950 to 54 anti-communist witch hunt, and with the onset of the Cold War, his politics effectively ended his mainstream musical and theatrical careers. Robeson Jr. formed his theory about an attempt to neutralize his father in Moscow. After more than 35 years of investigation and the gradual declassification of intelligence documents, a fluent Russian speaker, he has interviewed senior officials in Moscow, including the hosts of the surprise party, this is important, which appeared to have been filled with anti-Soviet dissidents. When he visited his father in hospital the day after the suicide attempt, the singer said he had felt trapped in a real-life, quote, James Bond nightmare. The walls had seemed to undulate, and everyone appeared hostile to the communist regime. He shut himself in his bedroom, suffering extreme depression and feelings of utter worthlessness, symptoms that can be induced by hallucinogenic drugs. Shortly afterwards, he was...
Crazy.
Yeah.
The surprise... Yeah, the element of the surprise party... Anyway, sorry, yeah.
Shortly afterwards, he was... It gets worse. Shortly afterwards, he was admitted to the Priory Hospital in London within 36 hours of his arrival, and against the advice of his Soviet doctors, Robeson was subjected to the first of 54 electroconvulsive shock therapy sessions. Mike Minicino, an MKUltra historian with contacts in American intelligence, said the argument that Robeson had been targeted by the CIA was, quote, entirely plausible. The Russian doctors and his family kept his suicide attempt and depression a secret, claiming he had suffered a heart attack. But between April and June 1961, the FBI kept a status of health file on the artist, which reveals that plans were made to prevent the world communist movement from exploiting his, quote, imminent death. Quote, the fact that such a file was opened at all is sinister in itself, said Robeson Jr., 71. It indicates a degree of prior knowledge that something was about to happen to him. So yeah, that was that, and they go over in the documentary this episode, and Robeson Jr. is obviously prominently featured in the documentary, and he repeats that pretty much, that he believed that there was some kind of anti-Soviet dissident who was probably a CIA agent, and spiked his drink with BZ, which is if anybody's seen the Tim Robbins film Jacob's Ladder. It's like a very disturbing, hallucinatory, Vietnam veteran movie. The drug at the end, sorry, spoiler alert, there's a big drug element to it, and the drug revealed at the end of the movie that they tested on all the soldiers and made them go insane was BZ. Yeah, that's it's a pretty bad news drug. I did find on YouTube. There's an interesting army video from 1963. If you look up psychotropic drug BZ tested on American soldiers 1963, it walks you through. The thing was probably processed at Lookout Mountain Air Force Base, but it takes 3 soldiers and it gives one a high dose of BZ, one a low dose, and then one a placebo, and then tracks their effects. And the guy who got the high dose does not have a good time. Let's put it that way. I think he ends up being high for 36 hours and gets really paranoid. Just also, as an aside, I have this weird memory, in my health class in high school, we had a health class, and my teacher used to be a cop. He was a cop in the 80s, and he was this big Greek guy, and he had a lot of really fucked up stories. One time he showed us a VHS tape of a 10-year-old boy who was a crack addict, a little white boy who was on crack, and they were interviewing him. They found him at a crack house or something. It was really dark, but he would always tell us fucked up things about and one time he did mention, we got this drug called BZ. And what we do is whenever there's a hostage situation or somebody's holed up in a house with a gun and the police have them surrounded, you shoot in some BZ canisters, and this drug, when you start inhaling it, you it like takes over your mind, and you just have this like instinctual reaction to like run away from it. So it's like tear gas, but more psychological. It's not just like a physical discomfort effect. Yeah, it's like it drives you insane, and like
for your health teacher to say, "Wow." Right.
Yeah, I don't know why that popped in my head, but so every time I've heard of BZ after that has been like, oh god, like that drug, like, you know, the crazy one that you could shoot into a building and then make everybody like, you can't be like locked in a room with it, like you'll go mad, basically. So like that's the kind of thing maybe they spiked Robeson's drink with, and you know, I think it lines up pretty well. The coincidence of well, yeah, and also the fact that they took at first, like, this horrible things happen. He attempts suicide. He goes to, they said that, I believe his son said that in the documentary, quote, he recovered quickly under his Soviet doctor's treatment, which means like they were Soviets and therefore not trying to like destroy him. So, you know, they helped him get a little better, but then unfortunately, for whatever reason, they decided to transfer him to the Priory Hospital in London, which, as that article stated, had at least 2 MK Ultra scientists lurking in the wings there that started treating him, and right away they just like hauled him off to the electroshock therapy department, and like, what was it, like 53 times or something like that, gave him electroshocks. And then after a while, I think maybe his son got there and realized that like he was absolutely like deteriorating in London, so they brought him to East Berlin, and then his health rapidly improved again. So, I mean, like, interesting. Different approaches to medicine, perhaps. Like, maybe one's trying to MK you and break your brain and, like, psychologically, like, assassinate you. And the other ones are just, like, socialist doctors that are trying to make you feel...
and send you to hell in a bucket.
Going to hell in a bucket, everyone around him. I really see it so vividly, like him in this party and realizing these are all like, you know, revisionist, like anti-Soviet scum, like hanging out with him, and they're all just like it's terrifying, you know, and he's just around all these I wish that come on, Soviets, like, you know, like, I don't know, I guess, you know, they love him, he loves them, they don't want to like impose who he can party with, I guess. I'd be curious to know, like, how did so many like scumbag anti-Soviet dissidents get into the Paul Robeson party? Like, come on, like, didn't they have KGB looking out? Maybe they assumed that because he's in Moscow, like, he's safe, like, and maybe Robeson thought he was safe because he was in Moscow, like, there's nobody can get me here finally, you know. But that, you know, that was like very tragic, and it basically did, like, he came back to the US eventually, and he did make a few public appearances at like civil rights events throughout the 1960s, but was in pretty poor health and was like in and out of the hospital, and just was like this whole episode like really fucked him up, like physically, and I think kind of psychologically, and I think his son said when it got to like the early to mid 70s, you know, he told him once that something along the line, he hinted at the fact that, you know, like, I've contemplated just like, you know, committing suicide, but like because of my family and because of what I represent to like the world, you know, liberation movements and all that kind of stuff, like I there's no way I'm gonna like go out that way, you know what I mean? Like he was kind of a soldier to the end and was like, no, like that's not and that was when like he realized that, you know, his dad was kind of like at the end of the road, and you know, his health was declining, and so he died, I think it was either in 76 or 77 in Philadelphia. I think he moved in with like his sister.
The sauciest thing is the like FBI like file about his imminent death, you know,
that they were hoping maybe, I think if he hadn't gone taken back to East Berlin, like what kind of shit could they have done to him? Like, he was really in like the caught in the spider's web there. I mean, I think they probably should have never sent him back to London. I mean, that was a big misstep. Just kept him, you know, behind the Iron Curtain, where like medicine is more genuine, and not trying to kill you.
Where they weren't like about to poison him. I wonder why. I mean, maybe they just like didn't, I don't know. I feel like, I mean, he wasn't, it's not like he was British either. you know. So
yeah,
like,
maybe they assumed that I think
something. I don't know.
maybe they assumed because it was like a mental health thing, and there were a lot of cutting edge hospitals, and the medical establishment maybe had some more like cutting edge facilities and like experts and stuff for somebody of Paul Robeson's stature. Maybe they erroneously kind of thought that if there's some kind of like deep psychological problem going on here. I mean, I wonder to what extent like either Robeson or like the KGB or the Soviet doctors like thought that he might have been poisoned right off the bat, because it almost seems like maybe they didn't, like they genuinely thought that he had kind of like a depressive kind of psychotic break and like tried to kill himself. So maybe they didn't immediately assume the actions of saboteurs, and perhaps they should have, because then that ended up being like this pretext to get him into a Western hospital where they could do all kinds of shit on him. And thankfully they got him back in time to like kind of, so they couldn't kill him or do whatever, or lobotomize him or do whatever the hell they wanted. But they finally got him. They got him to a point of exhaustion where he couldn't go out anymore and be this like leading figure and like crisscross the world and do all these things. He just like didn't have the juice for it anymore after that. I mean, I guess he was getting a little bit older, and he did have like heart problems and stuff kind of going up to that was slowing him down slightly. But it's just like, can you imagine like the 60s with Paul Robeson still operating at like a high level, like with Malcolm X, with Martin Luther King, and like would he have been, I'd be curious to see maybe like the Black Panthers, like how much they were aware and inspired by Paul Robeson, because it seems like he is actually like their most direct kind of predecessor in terms of being a black communist, basically wedding the ideas of like class struggle and like a racial inequality together. But like in the stuff I've seen of Black Panthers, I don't see Paul Robeson's name like brought up as like a a symbol of like, yeah, like this guy, there's no, I don't know, like Robeson brigades or anything like that. Like he just seemed to be he dropped off even by the late 60s. Maybe it was also he was eclipsed by like this new young hotshot generation that didn't particularly like want to worship too much at the altar of like the older generation of activists, which is ironic because like I feel like Robeson is like the one who was already radical back in the day, so like in a way he was like a prophet kind of, at least from, you would think from their standpoint. But I feel like maybe it's a testament to how much he dropped off the radar and had been thoroughly blacklisted from the culture, that the United States government effectively accomplished like people forgetting about him, even though he was alive for another 15 years. Like everyone just kind of forgot. And when he died, it wasn't, I mean, people came from all around. Like he did have a big kind of public funeral, but he, ever to this day, he doesn't really get. There hasn't been a movie about Paul Robeson. I believe Steve McQueen, the director of the aforementioned 12 Years a Slave, I think he had been like planning a Robeson movie for a while, but it either just like fell apart or like perennially will never come together because like the establishment doesn't want to remind people he exists. But now that we have like a Fred Hampton movie that is like not a total whitewash job, I wonder if like one day we will get like a Paul Robeson biopic. I kind of shudder to think, like, because there's so many ways it could be whitewashed, right?
Yeah. It seems like I'm just looking into his stay at the Priory Hospital right now, and it seems like what might have happened is that he left Moscow for London, and then, like, having been, like, checked out of the Russian hospital, or the hospital in Moscow.
Oh, okay.
Or, and then, like, he had another episode where he became depressed and suicidal, and then he was immediately sectioned under the British Mental Health Act. So
wow,
yeah.
So they, I mean, is there any like more details on like the circumstances of his second breakdown? Because it's like, did they get him again? Did they slip another thing in his drink when he got to London?
I don't know. It's possible. I'm just like trying to put some of these details together to assemble it. This is pretty fucked up, though. This is what his son really is the one who really propounded this theory that he was a target of MK programs. And in fact, his son himself said that he also started to feel hallucinatory and suicidal symptoms that he had never experienced before or since, after visiting his father.
I'm almost thinking like sonic weaponry, like ultra low frequency waves, like all that shit Aquino loves talking about, like microwave weapons, literally like a targeted individual. Like, I don't know how much they really had at their disposal in like the early 1960s. They definitely had BZ, they were already testing and using that. And they had LSD and all kinds of other things. I don't know if they had anything like more nefarious than that, but that's creepy that his son felt similar thing. Like, were they like poisoning his like water supply, like just pumping BZ like into his water pump or something? I don't know.
I want to read like his son's book, which is the Undiscovered Paul Robeson Quest for Freedom, which maybe goes more into more detail around it, but this is really something about his stay at the Priory. The pattern of Paul's treatments, the frequency of electroconvulsive therapy over a period of 20 months, about 10 days apart, averaged over 5 courses totaling 54, as well as a number and variety of powerful drugs that were administered, antipsychotics, including insulin coma with doses of 10 to 50 units of insulin, anti-anxiety drugs, and antidepressants, alarmed me when I read the prior records in 1998. Jeez. So he wasn't actually allowed to see the records until then, like after years of trying. The God. ECT was administered whenever Paul showed initial signs of depression to bring him out of it, and immediately following major improvement in his behavior.
Wow.
So they're like, oh, he's depressed, shock him. Oh, he's feeling better, shock him.
Oh, he's doing better, shock him. Oh, my God.
Yeah. The powerful antidepressants were prescribed continuously, despite their failure by the doctor's admission to provide any benefit. I found this combined treatment especially troubling because it resembled the mind depatterning treatment funded by MKUltra Project, which consisted of intensive electroshocks, usually combined with prolonged drug-induced sleep. The similarity is noteworthy because by early 1962, Richard Helms, the creator of the MKUltra Project, had been elevated to the post of Deputy Director of Plans and was in direct communication with Hoover concerning Paul's health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds very similar to what like Dr. Ewan Cameron was doing at McGill in Montreal. The psychic driving experiments, like trying to wipe people. I mean, what they maybe had already discovered by the early 60s as a result of Cameron's experiments on people. And this has been gone into in like many MKUltra documentaries, like people's testimonies of going through this stuff, that I guess the part of like implanting false memories or identities in people, I guess, didn't work out the way he was doing it. But the erasing somebody's entire identity part, that did work. So if you want to entertain like the most sinister possibilities, they had the technology to do that to people. Just like give you LSD, put you in insulin comas, electroshock you for like months and months and months. I mean, what was it? He was there for 20 months?
He was there for like something like that. Hold on. Yeah, I think.
Jesus.
Yeah. He returned to the United States in December 1963, and he entered. He entered in August 1963. So yeah, it was not 20 months, I guess, but it was like 12 months.
So wait, did he come back right before or right after the JFK assassination? Did he come in August or December?
That was in November 1963. So yeah, he came back right after.
Wow. Okay. That's also an interesting thing that I didn't realize before we did like research for this, or I'd forgotten that he was going to be meeting with Castro on the day of the Bay of Pigs invasion. That's like wild.
That is interesting.
And the idea that he would be there to like it would be such an international like snafu and like embarrassment to the Americans that like Paul Robeson's there, like this great celebrity, like hanging out with Castro, and they had to prevent that at any cost. And then it's kind of even interesting to think of from the perspective of like, I wonder what Paul Robeson thought about, or if he ever said anything about like the assassinations of the 60s. Because I feel like Paul Robeson was such a sharp guy who was like so allergic to like, I don't know, bullshit and like capitalist lies, that he probably would have been, I maybe I'm being optimistic, but I feel like he would have been on the tip of like the right-wing fascists, like killed JFK, they killed Malcolm X, they killed Martin Luther King, etc. And so they took care of that right beforehand, didn't they? So he comes back right after.
He was not there at
neutralized.
the time. And immediately upon returning, he was hospitalized again. You know, it wasn't over.
In two fragile states, because if Paul Robeson was like dialed into what was going on at the time, and I mean, especially if he was like hanging out with Castro, they're talking about things, like he probably would have like gotten involved to some degree. Who knows? Like he might have gotten involved during the Cuban Missile Crisis, for all we know, like agitating, you know, and things like that. So like, there's all kinds of ways like this guy like could have had certain influences on culture, even though he was like largely blacklisted. But especially when the 60s got more radical, and maybe like Americans were looking at somebody like, you know, Che Guevara with like a bit of a romantic eye, or you know, or Fidel, or you know, Ho Chi Minh or whatever, to have like one of the biggest stars and like most brilliant, accomplished like Americans, and like a leader for like civil rights and all that stuff, going around the world like meeting with all these communist world leaders and like endorsing them. Like at a certain point, like if you sort of let him like run wild around the world and do whatever he wanted and still speak forcefully the way he would, then you know, this could be a constant source of embarrassment for the U.S. imperialists, and they had to take him off the playing board, basically, you know, at the beginning of the 60s, or else he could have complicated any number of like nefarious schemes. I mean, or like Vietnam for that matter. I mean, my God, like if you know, like he could have been really the elder statesman radical that united all these different factions, and like and served as like a wise leader of like the new left, so they wouldn't just end up like taking acid and like robbing banks, but you know, they would like be more, I don't know, like it's interesting how if this episode hadn't happened, like what kind of impact would Robeson have had on the 60s, and it's interesting to consider.
Definitely. I mean, it definitely is something that would, like, you know, disrupt his entire life in a horrible way. It's like not an experience you easily recover from. So he was absolutely neutralized. You know, he still, like, obviously, like, stuck his commitments, like, to the end of his life. He didn't have the same type of MK situation as like maybe some others where they're like, now I'm a patriot,
like Tim Leary. But exactly. Also like I think we mentioned that like during the period where he had his passport taken away from 52 to 57, the condition for getting it back was like, we'll give this back to you, but you have to sign this anti-communist affidavit, basically saying like communism sucks, I'm not a communist, it's evil, Stalin killed 500 trillion people, and like blah blah blah. And he said, no, I'm not going to sign that shit. That's like who I vote for, and my political beliefs are like private and like under the law, and fuck you, I'm not going to do it. And so when the Supreme Court overturned that, he was able to get his passport back without you know, kissing the ring and saying an anti-communist. And I think that is a victory in its own way, that his entire life nobody ever cajoled him. And I think at a point maybe it was even deeper than like, I mean, I think he deeply believed in like the historical importance of the Soviet Union, but I think he also had a personal thing of like, you are not going to make me break my conviction that I believe. I'm like, nothing you can do to me is going to make me like trash talk the Soviet Union. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to die. And like, nope, like there's nothing on the record that you can ever say like Paul Robeson denounced his previous beliefs, and like so many other, you know, people did for a variety of reasons, but he stuck to his guns to the absolute end. And I think for that, he earns my respect eternally.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely an admirable person, for sure.
Станки, которые они сейчас выпускают. Известного певца и выдающегося борца за мир здесь знает каждый рабочий. Поль Робсон спел старинную русскую песню «Эй, ухнем».
How is it that the American Negro, who for so long has been a second-class citizen in the United States...
Still is, I'm sorry.
How is it that he's contributed so much to American culture?
Well...
Music, dance, everything you can think of.
Well, I have to be very modest about that. I would say certainly as we look at the African peoples, in Nigeria, for example. I just got a wonderful invitation to go to Nigeria to be present at the installation at the Governor General Ezekwe, an old friend, who now, and I had to cable him. I'm in Australia. I certainly would like to be with you, but I'm out here with some good folks. But I'll get to Nigeria later.
Mr. Robeson, do you feel that Africa is to some extent an affinity for it, a home, or do you still feel America is essentially your home? How do you feel?
Well, let me come here. I'll come to that in just a second. But to come back to it, so I would say the Africans and the American Negroes have turned out to be an extraordinarily gifted people. The great tragedy is that by not making us full-class citizens as yet in America, they may be losing, I don't know how much yet. And to come back, I would say that unquestionably, I am an American, born there. My father slaved there. Upon the backs of my people was developed the primary wealth of America, the primary wealth. You have to have accumulated wealth to start, to build. You did it another way here in Australia. You had to build your accumulated wealth too. You just came and took it. You know what I mean? And that's what they did in most of the countries. That's what you Europeans did. You just took it. We got to catch up with you a little bit. That's so in America. So there's a lot of America that belongs to me yet. You understand? But just like a Scottish American is proud of being from Scotland, I'm proud for being African. Now, in our school books, they tried to tell me that all Africans were savages, till I got to London and found most of the Africans I knew were going to Oxford and Cambridge and doing very well, and learned their culture. And even once somebody had the temerity, after one had conquered the Chinese people and imposed upon them the opium trade and everything else, to suggest that they were a backward people, just the people who had been civilized so long over the rest of you folks didn't make any sense at all. So somewhere, it was wonderful to find about the colored peoples of the world that they were very advanced. So I would say today that I'm an American who is infinitely prouder to be of African descent, no question about it. No question about it. I'm an Afro-American, and I don't use the word American ever loosely again.
Now, this was the feeling.
That's right.
That when you were in London about 1937, 38, you really had the world at your feet then. I mean, you're a tremendous success. You're recognised over the world, and yet you went back to America. This was the feeling that took you back?
I felt I had to go back to my people. That's right. The going was tough, and today I can go back. I just had my passport renewed. I could go back to pretty tough times now. But any time I could get a telegram next week that the Negro people had gathered somewhere in one of their conferences, as they could, and say, Paul, in the difficulties that are going on in America, would you come back and help us? I would take the plane as soon as I finished my engagement.
So I guess
too bad about libraries being closed, because I would definitely like to track down maybe it would take a little bit of time, something that I haven't really gone through the hassle of doing lately. But I would like to read the second volume of Undiscovered Paul Robeson, because that's where I guess we could see some more of what his son had to say about his stay in the priory and everything. Yeah.
I like his son a lot. From what I saw in the documentary and what I've read about him, he seems like he is like a chip off the old block, and very much. And he actually went to, I don't think we mentioned, but like he went to school in the Soviet Union for like several years, which is why he's fluent in Russian.
His son, that's what in the HUAC trial, they're like, why didn't you send your son to Rutgers, because he was sent to school in the Soviet Union instead.
And he explained that, like, my son's very different from me, where like if somebody in this room right now like called me a slur, I'd feel the urge to like walk up and knock his lights out. But my son, because he grew up in a society, or he went to school in this society for several years where like color prejudice like was a non-existent phenomenon and was in fact illegal, like he doesn't even care if somebody calls him a slur. Like it doesn't even, just bounces off him. And that was kind of like you love to see it when that happens. He was a little young pioneer, he probably literally was probably.
Probably.
But I guess we can wrap up there. I think check out Robeson's music. I'm planning on watching some of his movies. I heard they're on Criterion, the 1930s ones. I like to watch Jericho and what was it, The Lonesome Valley or something, from 1940, the Welsh Miner one. There's a few good ones, I think, that may be worth watching, like the less problematic ones. But also, like, his book Here I Stand is very good. I read that like 2 years ago, and it's like very straight up, like good biographical thing, and like his description of like kind of interfacing with like the NAACP and like different facets of the civil rights movement. He has some very like poignant critiques of like, I think kind of like the more Martin Luther King like nonviolence wing. He's like supportive of it, but doesn't want to like fetishize like the nonviolence thing. Like, we should just be like Gandhi all the time and get like attacked, and you know, like never stand up and like defend ourselves. Like, that is the way. He's like a little bit like critical of that no, you have to like stand up for yourself, and like, you know, like maybe, I don't know, but he's also like not like an adventurist, like let's start blowing up like banks or something. Like, you know, it's just good shit. I think he's like the most brilliant and accomplished and like praiseworthy American communist that we've ever had. I'm comfortable saying that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I feel like he is a standard to which other people, if you are gonna like, you know, put a big portrait on the wall and like, you know, worship it, if you're gonna have any kind of cult of personality, I feel like modeling the behavior and like the ethos of Paul Robeson is a good Yeah, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just gonna say it's interesting to think about like him as someone who's like not really looked to so much. I mean, not to say that I don't think like, you know, people like Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali are like, you know, super inspirational figures who like offer a lot, like, you know, in terms of their thought, especially Malcolm X. But yeah, it is interesting that someone like Paul Robeson, who really did have a lot of you know, intellectual contributions and a lot of like material contributions, and who also was like a tremendous artist, isn't really someone who is remembered as much as perhaps others. Certainly,
I think the existence of Paul Robeson,
come down to like the Settlers guy like Sakai versus Paul Robeson, I think, you know, he could stand to be remembered a bit more. You know, not to
no, it's not just
that, you know, obviously there's settler colonialism, but you know what I mean.
Yes, yeah. Which like Robeson was not like blind to or anything. It's just that
he wasn't a Strasserite. He wasn't, you know, a class reductionist. Sean P. McCarthy.
He wasn't a social imperialist or a social fascist or anything like that. Like, he really believed in. I think in a way he was like a Leninist in like the most pure kind of philosophical sense of somebody that read Marxist theory and then wanted to apply it to the unique like particular conditions of his country and his people, and wanted to find a way for it to like work within an American context very sincerely, which didn't mean like becoming a nationalist or like doing an entryism or like uniting with the KKK or like doing mind control on your followers or blaming the British for everything or standing Alexander Hamilton or, you know, wrapping yourself too much in the flag. Like, he was pretty clear-eyed about like what America was, I felt, but still had a certain optimism that, you know, it could experience a kind of like revolutionary transformation, and that like we could rebuild and even take some of like the principles that were gestured at in like the Bill of Rights or whatever, but not like totally stand it like Chomsky and just like go to sleep like cuddling it at night. You know, exactly. Right. How much more like the approach of a Robeson, like I think he was too good, so like they have to like erase him. You can't even shit talk him, really. Like, I think even that is like a failing strategy, because you're still like, wait, this guy was like the #1 athlete and like the #1 football player in America, the #1 Broadway star, like the #1 singer, like the #1 political activist, like got the Stalin Prize. Like, I mean, like, it's just like a staggering array of like achievements that he was able to like, and just like so many brave stances that like did destroy his career completely. Like, he walked into it knowing what it would do. Like, he in a way, you know, sacrificed a lot in terms of being like, he could have been like, I don't know, the Jay-Z of like the 1950s if he had wanted to, and like cozy up to like rich white people and like play that game if he had wanted to. He could have tapped out at any time and like modulated or turned on the Soviet Union even, and then he would have been at least like an acceptable civil rights figure. But this dude had his convictions and he did not back down. And I think it's like a heroic example for everybody, and an instructive one for like if you're even trying to think about how to conduct like left politics in like America, like I don't know, like not saying. I mean, like, obviously,
I don't know if we mentioned it, but his father was literally like a slave. Like
yes, his father was a slave.
Really something, that.
Well, he says that great line at the end when, like, even though it is the James Earl Jones, like, that's always like kind of giving me chills.
Is real,
I think this is an actual quote, one of his most famous, where they go like, "If you love Russia so much, why don't you move there?" And he says, like, without missing a beat, like, "Because my father was a slave and my people died and bled and died building this country, and I'm going to stay here and have a part of it, just like you. And no fascist-minded people are going to drive me from it. Is that clear?" And then, like, that's when they're like, "All right, I'm done with this meeting. Like, meeting adjourned." And he's like, "It should be."
Yeah, I
like,
can't take it anymore.
So good.
Yeah,
exactly. I can't take it anymore.
I can stand. Yeah,
they can't handle it. But that beautiful, like, "Why don't you move to Russia?" Because no, my ancestors died building this country, and like, I just love, like, "I'm gonna stay here and have a part of it, just like you little fucking shit." Like, no, like, you can't get rid of me. Like, I'm not gonna run away. And I mean, that's a very brave to stare down like these like fascist senators basically and call them the fuck out, and then like drive them so crazy that they just adjourn the meeting after like 10 minutes is really indicative of like his like
and that
brilliance.
Really, that really is still a thing today. Like, this is very much a tangent, so we should wrap up. But there's like a very prominent Muslim personality, Mohammed Hijab, who is known in the UK for like just being kind of like an apologist. I wouldn't necessarily recommend anything that he says, but he's kind of like a celebrity in that little world. And he recently posted something that was like, I often have emphasized like the colonial impact of the the West and the colonialism and imperialism, but I haven't been grateful enough to this country for giving me like
I saw that,
and it's just like and it's like that's the thing, like most like it's this complex of like the Jackie Robinson, not to demean Jackie Robinson for like all of what he had to face and like for breaking the color barrier in baseball at all, but it is this sort of thing where there's like an expectation of like, how dare you, like why aren't you being grateful to us for letting you be in this country that's out, this white country. Like
exactly.
How, you need,
that question of ownership still looms over everything. This is our country, and we're letting you have a part of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but Robeson's saying no. Like, I deserve a part of it. Like, we all do.
Like, to be like, oh, I should be, because like my parents were immigrants or something. Like, I really shouldn't be upset about colonialism, and I should be more grateful that like they're giving me healthcare. Whereas like people who are white just take like they feel that those things are owed to them correctly because that's like the what the country teaches them. Like so it's just like.
But then you hate to see that kind of like, oh, thank you, like that, like the sad little like healthcare please meme, like saying thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Ugh, you hate to see it.
Right.
So don't gratuitous, don't like slavishly thank the ruling class for like throwing you breadcrumbs.
Don't develop an inferiority complex like out of contrarianism because like some kind of like someone was woke and doing cancel culture, and so then you had to do 180 degrees around, and you're like, I don't like that, so now I'm gonna just become like a huge apologist, or see communism and therefore like feel threatened and like have to throw Molotov cocktails and become like an anti-Semite and do lynching or whatever.
Don't do any of that. No.
Don't do any of that.
Even though those people fucking won, but they never got Paul, really. They weren't able.
Yeah.
They never got him to break and, you know, do the 1984, like, he loved the party kind of thing. But, like, for capitalists, they never got him to, like, go on a 1970s, like, variety show and, like, you know, denounce, like, by the way, Paul Robeson, huge supporter of, like, sending in the tanks in 56 to Hungary, by the way. Just thought I'd mention that. Big, full supporter, and I'm right there with him. He said, you know, these, like, those people are, he said, like, those are the same type of people that were, like, conducting pogroms, like, during World War II. Like, fuck those people. Khrushchev, 100% right. You know, I don't know. His son said that he was always with the reformers in the Soviet Union, but he didn't feel like, you know, not like he was going to go and, like, talk shit basically out of turn.
Right, yeah, and I believe that is true. Yeah. Definitely. And I think
he said his son said he was always with the reformists. The main enemy of the time was not Stalin, not the USSR, but the right wing of the United States. Cool. You know? I mean, that works for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right,
okay.
absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing of, like, you know, if he's, I mean, when you're an American and people, like, are going to be like, well, what about, like, this, you know, like, if you're talking about, like, American, you know, obviously, but it's, like, always a distraction, and,
I feel like that's but, maybe the talent that he had more than anything else was, like, parrying, like anti-tanky, like, attacks. Like, well, Mr. Robeson, what about blank? And, like, it's not like but he didn't necessarily just do it in, like, a, like, you know, like a full Grover Fur kind of way of, like, well, that's just, like, not true. I mean, like, or, you know, like, that, like, bourgeois lie, like, not going to talk about it. He would, like, he would always try to offer, like, a contextual answer.
Yeah, well, he was able to, like, change the frame and not accept, like, the bullshit frame that was being imposed, like, which is a very difficult skill. Like, you know,
we should all learn from it that, like, even though he did say that, like, well, most of the people in gulags were fascist, which, like, during the war, I mean, like, there's a mixture of things going on there. But I think that, you know, like, even though he did say that, he didn't do the mistake that maybe some young hothead Marxist would make today when somebody says, like, Stalin killed, like, you know, 5 million people, and somebody goes, yeah, he did, and it was a good thing, you know, like, no, you don't really want to, like, I think we did this with, remember in the grotto, somebody did bring up that Lenin, like, ordered the murder of the Romanov family, and then that immediately turned into kind of a dispute, or, you know, a debate where some people were saying, well, you know what? Like, fuck the Romanov family. He had to do it. And the other person was saying, well, then I can never support communism or the Soviet Union because that is just evil to, like, murder a whole family. Like, there had to be a different way. And then I had to be like, hey, y'all, let me just slide in here with the fact check. And I looked it up, and actually, like, there is no actual, like, historical record that Lenin, like, ordered the death. There was, like, a variety. It was either the local people that were holding them.
That, you know, it wasn't like that
a sinister
where, like, Lenin personally broke into, like, the you know the palace and like, you know, marched up the stairs and, like, shot, like, Anastasia's
pulled out a revolver
while she jumped through, like, a time vortex, like, to the present day United States to, like, make friends with, like, a little suburban girl. Like, that's not what happens.
Yes. You know, it was never something that was, like, ordered.
By the kindly Rasputin. You know,
the hero, the real hero.
That's not how it happens. No, you shouldn't like, promote, like, massacring children or killing them, even if they're the children of monarchs. Who are oppressive, like, you know. It's
like, look, if things get crazy and it happens, contrary
to Foucault's remarks, maybe my mind is just, you know, colonized by the concept of justice. But I do think that justice is actually a pretty trans-capitalist concept being mentioned in the Noble Quran and such things. So I generally think it's good to preserve, like, a concept of justice and, like, try to, you know, like, have, like, adjudication and, like, determine people's guilt and, like, you know, do things
absolutely
in, like, an equitable manner, like that, rather than like going wild and shooting. But
justice is not inherently like a bourgeois psyop or like a bourgeois pseudoscience. It is a thing that people do kind of want expressed in like their political
As we said
system.
in that episode, I got Foucault's point, but he picked a bad example with the concept of justice, which I think definitely is not like necessarily wedded to the capitalist episteme, although perhaps our concept of it is in certain ways
mediated by it, of course.
Right. In conclusion, like, don't develop an inferiority complex and like have to suck up to America for giving you the basic rights that you're entitled to as a citizen of the country.
Stay away from British psychiatric hospitals.
Yeah, exactly.
If at all possible.
Yeah, if you hear like a slightly remixed version of like your favorite sentimentalist, like melodramatic song about like a nice river, don't like have a conniption and like fly into a racist mania and do a riot.
Don't do it.
Definitely, definitely bad. The next time you see someone and you feel like they're being uppity, just try to bear in mind the lessons of peak skill. Just ask yourself, like, are they really doing anything wrong, or am I just conditioned to be threatened by the infection of having my beautiful white suburban lifestyle dream taken away?
The same thing you would ask about Stalin.
All right. Not that our listeners need to be concerned about these things. They just need to remember the normal things of watch out for gins.
Stand your ground. Don't let the like narrow-minded fascists in any committee kowtow you. We're in for, so be like Paul.
Let's add him to the pantheon of socialist American heroes.
He's there. He the highest one
Eugene
as far
V.
as
Debs, but I you really do hear about him.
You hear about him the least, so spread the word.
He was definitely a trailblazer, way back in the early days.
Go out there and Paul Pill your friends. A lot of his music's on YouTube, and I don't think anybody can deny his like talent and prowess if you watch him. So do what Paul did himself, and maybe try to like Paul Pill people by like watching his movies and like listening to his music, because his revolutionary ethos and ideas are embedded in all of those things, because he was fucking brilliant and cool. So.
By the way, before we stop, I did recall that where I had gotten that sort of whiff of like Beria skepticism was from like a random account on Twitter called Woke Beria that I came across. That is kind of LARPing as Beria while peddling a little bit of skepticism to Beria's conviction. So, obviously some doubt hangs over it, but at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily, like, go all in on what Woke Beria is putting out there. But,
we'll see. We will conduct a people's trial, or what is it called? A Sharia trial or something.
A Shura council on
Shura council.
Who actually deserve to be premier.
And we'll try to keep the spirit of Paul with us to help guide our hand, so we become proper Americans, good American socialists, and not like cringy like lefty adventurists who drop acid and like build communes that fail and become stockbrokers in the 80s
and like just love the Constitution
in a way. Paul Robeson's personal tragic personal circumstance is like a big argument against acid communism. Like when you're hanging out in the Soviet Union, like, don't take a powerful psychedelic drug.
Radical potential of the drug that was used to poison all the leaders of all the potential leaders of base. Thank you.
It seemed to be like it was going much better before that stuff got spiked in his drink. So let's we can put that. Not saying you can never do it again, but like maybe let's not center it.
It's haram. It's haram.
Yeah, you're right. makes you, as somebody in the grotto said, like it'll make you dance like a whirling dervish, but it'll be fake, so you're gonna go to hell in a bucket.
Yeah, you'll definitely, very likely that you'll go to hell. But one of Paul Robeson's foibles, in addition to being narcophobic, was that he didn't quite get to discover Islam, but it was kind of before that, that real break through.
He was though a lifelong Christian who attended AME Zion Church, and so that's another thing that's interesting is how could a devout Christian worship Stalin? Also like cancel him.
Yeah.
Wow. For like
well, I just don't
worshiping
see how
talk about a cult of personality, like
unknownism.
General Secretary Sky Daddy up there.
Wow, yeah, he believed in a Sky Daddy.
Yet another reason I stand Paul Robeson is because like he wasn't afraid to like be religious and be like a tanky at the same time, and actually like it was fine. Wow. Like nobody killed him in the Soviet Union for being a Christian.
Wow,
nobody cared.
Sounds like he was very much in the Vampire's Castle. I don't know. I think that between with all of this race stuff and also being a Christian and not loving being dosed with BZ at a surprise party, maybe they were just trying to get
more narcophobia, really.
Yeah, true. He was being narcophobic, like all those
by having a bad reaction to BZ. That was narcophobic.
MI5 agents who were like at his surprise party were just trying to like give him a nice little present, but he was just so narcophobic that and such a pedantic, judgy Christian that he got upset by.
Well, we're back where we started. We're just like maliciously medicalizing like everything he went through to be like, it was his irrational fear of doing hard drugs that was actually the problem. Not which caused a psychological complex to develop that could have been solved if he just developed a casual heroin habit.
Exactly. Well, he probably was one of those people who's prone to having bad experiences with like weaponized hallucinogens just because he was irresponsible or something, or had
he didn't imbibe enough like theosophy. He was too obsessed with materialism, so he couldn't like experience the wonder, the infinitude, the wondrous infinitude of love.
Yeah. He was too materialist, too religious. A narcophobe. The ultimate trifecta, and he changed the lyrics to Old Man River, and that cannot be abided. He didn't send us on Rutgers.
All I can say is rest in power, Commandante Paul. You are in the pantheon now of subliminal jihad forever, and you are
one of our rare, as you said, like positive treatments of a figure from the past.
Yes. Yes, he very much deserves it.
The Busta Rhymes one was mostly positive.
Busta Rhymes. Brian De Palma kind of. Maybe I don't know about Freakin'. He's a little much.
Freakin's on the edge. That's a little bit on the edge. I mean, nothing. I would not put either of those people on the level of Paul Robeson.
That's true. That's true.
Definitely he's the the most admirable possible figure.
I mean, they came up in the cultural wasteland of like the post-Red Scare. No, it's true. Yeah, Rumi's Rumi's on there. We're in the pantheon. All right, we're over 4 hours. So we're stopping, and until next time, dear listeners, stay vigilant.
Peace.
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. In Salt Lake City, Joe, says I, him standing by my bed. They framed you on a murder charge, says Joe, but I ain't dead. Says Joe, but I ain't dead. The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. takes more than guns to kill a man. Says Joe, I didn't die. Says Joe, I didn't die. And standing there as big as life, and smiling with his eyes, says Joe, what they can never kill went on to organize, went on to organize. From San Diego up to Maine, in every mine and mill, where workers strike and organize, it's there you'll find your hill. It's there you'll find your hill. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. I never died, says he.